Well, morning and welcome to this session. I'm very pleased to be here, very pleased to be invited to talk quickly about the state of the planet and living in harmony with nature. So my name's Howe and I'm from WWF New Zealand, World Wildlife Fund. We're part of the global organisation. Our mission is to create a future where people live in harmony with nature. So to kick off, I thought I'd talk briefly about the planet, the state of the planet, what's going on, what we know, what some of the problems are. Then I'll bring that back down to a New Zealand level, use some illustrations and examples of what the global trends mean for our country, and then a few things that we can do about it. So every 2 years, WWF produces this flagship report. It's called the Living Planet Report. It looks at the way in which the species and habitats on our planet are in decline, and how our footprint, our ecological footprint, is increasing. Our footprint is about both consumption and production. Biodiversity is about both species and habitats, and we'll have a look at both of those in just a minute. So here's a graph which shows the decline in the Living Planet Index. Now, the Living Planet Index takes about 3,000 species from about 9,000 populations around the world and looks at how they've declined since 1970. Now, the overall decline, as you can see, is minus 28%. It is a bit abstract, and what we'll do in a moment is look at what this means for species in New Zealand, so we can see a direct correlation between the way global species and habitats are in decline and New Zealand species and habitats are in decline. At the same time, we'll have a quick look at the ecological footprint. This is the way in which the way people live impact on the planet. You can see there are a number of categories that we use: built up land, fishing, forests, grazing, cropland and carbon, to show that overall we're now exceeding the planet's capacity by 50%. So in fact we need 1.5 planets to make enough resources to live the way that we are currently living today. And that's obviously, we don't have 1.5 planets, and we're not likely to have 1.5 planets in the near future. So we need to reduce our footprint to come down below the planet's capacity to provide us with life. This is a very quick graph showing the problem that we currently have, particularly with climate change. And you'll have seen in that previous slide that carbon emissions alone make up for more than half of our entire footprint on the planet. And climate change is in fact one of the biggest problems we're facing. And this just shows the rise in average temperature and the rise of CO2 in the atmosphere. If anyone was in any doubt that this is real, this graph proves it beyond any doubt. Average temperature going up, carbon emissions going up. We really need to do something about that, and we'll talk about that a bit later. So I said I'd bring some of those global abstract concepts down to a local level. Remember, the first graph was about the Living Planet Index, the decline in species and habitats at a global level. What does that really mean? Well, here's an example from New Zealand. Hector's and Maui's dolphin, down from 28,000 in 1970 to about 7,500 today. Now, this is a species that lives only in New Zealand. No one else can do anything about it except us, and yet we have allowed this decline to happen in New Zealand. This is the kind of species decline that is reflected in the Living Planet Index. Tigers, a very iconic species, 97% decline in 100 years. So there are only 3,200 left today in the wild. And again, this is a good example of the specifics, the individual species that when added together make up that Living Planet Index, the global decline in biodiversity. Now, it's not just that these large animals are nice to look at and we like the idea of having them around. Particularly animals like tigers, like dolphins, like sharks and tuna. The big animals are global predators. They keep the ecosystem in balance. And if we don't have a wide variety of life, a wide diversity of life, then all of our ecosystems, the way the world operates, starts to crumble. And soon enough we won't have a planet that's worth living on. There's a photograph of tuna, along with sharks, the big predators in the ocean, keep everything in check, keep everything in balance. And interestingly with predators, if you have predators like sharks and tuna, you have more of everything else than you would if you didn't have the predators. And one of the biggest problems in our oceans is a big decline in these big carnivorous fish, the sharks and the tuna, keeping everything in check, keeping the whole ecosystem working and providing food for us. Now, the question is, well, what can we do about it? And for us as citizens, there are three ways in which we can make a difference. In fact, there are three main groups that affect the way we live on the planet. One is the governments, or our government and the governments. One are businesses, and the third one is us. We're consumers and voters, and we have our own lifestyle choices. So I'm just going to touch on a few small things that relate to each of those three audiences. And WWF is a campaigning organisation. We focus on all three of those audiences, and changes are necessary in all of them in order to make a difference. Here's an example of government action or inaction. 20 years ago, some of you will remember the Rio Earth Summit made lots of promises about how we would conserve biodiversity, reduce greenhouse gases, prevent desertification, promote environmental education. Well, earlier this year, we produced a report. We held the government in New Zealand to account to the promises it made 20 years ago, and as we expected, those promises had not been met. You can find this on our website. It's called Beyond Rio. That's the Dominion Post's headline, Our Broken Promises, because that's the message that's in the report. And what it says is that across a whole load of areas, the government has not done what it said it would do. It's not things that we are now making up. These are things the government had already committed to in biodiversity conservation, greenhouse gas reductions, freshwater and education. This is what our government promised to do, and so as citizens we can write to our government and say, you promised to do this, why didn't you do it? It's very simple. If you pick up your pen, if you go to your computer, go to your email, you can influence what this government does. The consequences of some of those broken promises, particularly in the area of climate change, for example, if you look top right and bottom left, you'll see simulations of what will happen to where we are right now. It's top right, and bottom left, Wellington, if the sea level rises, when the sea level rises as a result of climate change. So these are not trivial things we're talking about. They're not nice to have things. These are essential to our future as a country. You see there's some drought conditions in Canterbury and some floods in the Manawatu. Now I talked about government and how we can influence government. It's important as citizens that we do that. Every government, not just the ones of particular political colours. The second thing I mentioned there was the way in which business can influence better conditions for our planet. And what you see there are the 15 key commodities that are produced in large quantities around the world that have environmental impacts. Palm oil, cotton, timber, shrimp, tuna, soy, beef. These are fundamental commodities, and the way in which they are produced is critical to our footprint on the planet and the way that we live. So what WWF has done in this area, so this is the second area, working with businesses, is that we've built partnerships with some of them to certify, to guarantee more sustainable methods of production. Now, it's not the only solution, and it doesn't cover everything, but one of the ways in which we can live within our means is by producing things more sustainably. The Marine Stewardship Council is one example of that. This is for marine wild fish and their capture. It says fish products with that label are more sustainable than other fisheries products. It's not the whole story, it doesn't solve all the problems, but it's a step forward on the footprint side to better production. So remember, if our impact on the planet, the way we live, is a combination of better production and reducing consumption. This is the better production side. Similarly, the Forest Stewardship Council, I'm quite sure that these publications around here are printed on Forest Stewardship Council certified paper, and you'd expect to see that a lot more in New Zealand now than you would 5 years ago. What it means is the pulp and paper, remember the commodity from the 15 commodities list, is produced more sustainably than other pulp and paper products. Again, it's not the only solution, it doesn't solve all the problems, but it's one part of the jigsaw on the production side. And the Forest Stewardship Council in particular has got a wide variety of options for certifying products. It includes recycled, it includes plantation, it includes all kinds of different variations to make sure that we can encourage as many pulp and paper producers or forest product producers as possible to produce their raw materials, their commodities, more sustainably. So we talked about governments, how you should influence those. You can go to our website, you can go to Greenpeace's website, you can go to other people's websites, you can write email petitions, you can pick up your pen and write directly to the government yourself. It's free to write to Parliament. We've talked about businesses and how helping them to, or encouraging them to produce commodities more sustainably is a way of solving the problem. And now we'll talk about individuals. There are lots of ways that we as individuals can make a difference. One is to get involved with community projects. This is a slide of seedlings at a nursery we funded, we funded about 450 local conservation projects. We funded about 450 local conservation projects over the last 12 years, all across New Zealand. Nurseries, specialist contractors, weed control, all kinds of activity to let New Zealanders do something for the environment in their own backyard. It's a very interesting area, and it's something that everyone can do, even if it's only one weekend a year. Now, I'm almost out of time. So I'll just mention just a couple of things that you can do in your everyday life, and I think that it's quite, I mean, quite a lot of these things are well known, but reducing your carbon emissions by walking or cycling or taking public transport, by recycling, by getting involved in local conservation projects, and by getting involved in environmental organisations, either local or international, like WWF. Now, I've got a small interactive bit so that you don't all get bored by me talking. I'm going to ask you two questions. Now, those of you who were in the previous session, no cheating, no cheating. How much, given that New Zealand's marine environment is very, very important to New Zealand, it's 15, 16, 17 times the area of the land, almost half the species in it live nowhere else on Earth. 80% of all New Zealand species live in the sea. We've got species like Maui's and Hector's dolphin don't live anywhere else. New Zealand sea lion don't live anywhere else. All those albatross and petrel species don't live anywhere else. Now, it's very important. How much of it do you think is protected? So, anyone think that more than 30% of our marine environment is protected? 25%? 20%? 15%? We have a very well-informed audience. In the general population in New Zealand, 9 out of 10 people thought that more was protected than actually is. They overestimated the amount of protection. So here you can see the amount of protection people thought there was. Well, actually there's only 0.3% of New Zealand's marine environment and marine reserves, which is very small. There are other kinds of protection you'll hear about, but marine reserves, which gives the strictest level of protection, 0.3%. Most people overestimated that. And when we asked them how much they thought should be protected, then very large proportions thought that more than 30% should be protected. And that's reasonable. If you think about the land, think about our national parks, we've got about 35 to 40% of our land area in national parks. No one thinks that's a bad idea. Everyone thinks it's the right thing to do. And in fact, there are arguments to have more national parks in the sea, despite the fact that the sea is full of these amazing species and it sustains a really important industry for New Zealand, which is fishing. But if you think about the other activities that we carry out in New Zealand, a lot of ecotourism, all based on the marine environment. So incredibly important and yet unprotected. So what I've tried to do there is just give you a very quick summary. Think about the planet as a whole, ecological footprint, exceeding our planet's capacity, Living Planet Index, declining species, showing you some of those examples from New Zealand, the sea level rise in Wellington and Auckland, the decline in species in New Zealand, and then had a quick look at the three main groups of people or groups of organisations that can do something about it. Governments, businesses and individuals, and how you can make a difference in each of those areas. Write to the government, ask them what their policies are, look for certification symbols or ask questions about sustainability of the products you buy, and then take action at a local level by getting involved in conservation projects or supporting environmental organisations or changing your lifestyle. So thank you very much for coming to the session. I really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of the show.